Tonight, before the castle is finished, before banners lift over the towers, before anyone points at the walls and calls them mighty, you begin in the damp dark, with a sore back and a mouth that still tastes faintly of yesterday's dust. People remember the clean outline of a fortress against the sky. They remember the gate, the hall, the height. They do not remember the mud packed into boot seams, or the ache in a shoulder after hours of hauling stone, or the quiet humiliation of chewing hard bread with hands that can barely close. A castle, in memory, always arrives complete. It is born old, solid, noble, almost inevitable, but nothing about it feels inevitable from where you are lying now on a bed of flattened straw, under rough cloth that never quite keeps out the cold. The grand thing people admire later begins like this, with grey light leaking into camp and a boot somewhere outside striking timber to wake the men. You open your eyes to a morning that looks unfinished, which feels fitting. Wind moves along the edge of the shelter and finds every gap. Your tunic is stiff where sweat dried into it yesterday. Your boots are still wet around the seams for a moment. While you are not yet standing, you can almost pretend you belong to some quieter life, one with sheep perhaps, or field rows, or a fire that belongs to your own house. But the illusion lasts only as long as it takes to hear the foreman's voice travel over the camp like a thrown stone. Then you sit up carefully, because your back protests when you move too quickly, and because in this place the day begins before your body agrees to it. When people speak about the Middle Ages, they sometimes drift to romance without meaning to. They imagine coloured glass and long tables, cloaks, falcons, torchlight. They do not linger on what it took to raise a wall high enough for any of that to matter. They do not usually place themselves among the men whose job was to carry, hold, drag, shovel, brace and repeat until the weather changed or the light failed. Yet that is where you are tonight, not in the hall, not in the tower, not standing beside a lord while he judges the horizon, but below all of it, at the stage where nothing is graceful yet and every future room is only a muddy intention. The beautiful lie of the castle is that it looks as though it simply insisted itself into existence. The truth is slower, the truth is colder, the truth is held together first by human bodies, and only later by mortar. So let the finished picture soften and drift away for now. Let the polished stone, the carved chapel, the defensive gate, the bright authority of the completed place, all recede like something seen through rain. Tonight you arrive much earlier than that, when the walls are still learning how to stand, and the men around you are still learning how much pain one project can ask of them. You do not need to admire the castle yet, you only need to walk toward it. The year, let us say, is 1247. The season is somewhere between the last hard cold and the first true warmth, which means the ground is soft in all the worst ways. The path from the camp to the site is already churned by carts, feet, hooves, and repeated disappointment. You pull your boots on, find the stale piece of bread you saved from yesterday, and chew as you walk, because there is no reason to save comfort for later. Later does not improve things very often. Around you move other men, some young enough to still treat the work as a challenge, some old enough to know better. A few have the stance of skilled craftsmen, most simply have the look of people who were required to be here by need, debt, rent, duty or hunger, which are not always easy to separate. Ahead, in the lifting grey, the site reveals itself in stages. First the scaffold lines, dark and crooked against the morning. Then the cut of the trenches, then the squat beginnings of walls that look less like architecture than like stone remembering where it might someday belong. Beyond that, a broad movement of labour, timber stacked in rows, carts creaking in, men bent over pits, others shoulder to shoulder at ropes. Smoke rising from somewhere that smells too bitter to be breakfast. Oh, the thing that first strikes you is not beauty or even scale exactly, but activity. So many tasks at once, each one incomplete, each one depending on something else that is also incomplete. The castle is not yet a building. It is a whole weather system of effort. No one explains much. No one gathers the labourers and says here is the vision. Here is the sequence. Here is the dream in all its noble shape. The dream belongs to men who do not carry the heaviest loads. The foreman shouts names and gestures, and crews form themselves around habit. Somewhere among all this stands the master mason, wrapped better than you are. Tablet in hand, already irritated by the day before it has fully begun. The lines of the project live inside his head more than anywhere else. To you, the site is all fragments. To him, perhaps, there is already a gatehouse, an inner yard, a hall, a chapel, a tower, a wall line clear as scripture. But that clarity does not descend. What reaches you is a rope, a crate, a shovel, a bucket, an instruction spoken once and not repeated. Still, the confusion settles into pattern more quickly than you expect. Men peel off toward the quarry road. Others head for the lime pit. Others begin clearing spoil from the deepening foundation trenches. A cart arrives with fresh cut logs, and someone swears because one has split wrong in transit. The scaffold crew begins climbing before the dew has dried from the planks. Somewhere nearby, a mule decides not to cooperate with civilization and must be argued with by 3 different men in 3 different tones. The whole place feels less like a carefully ordered enterprise than a beast with many limbs, each thrashing in its own direction while somehow moving the body forward. By the time the light strengthens, you have been assigned to a hauling crew, which means the day begins with rope in your palms and stone in your thoughts. Around you, the half-born castle keeps rising out of fog and labour. You realize, not unhappily, that a place like this does not need to make perfect sense all at once. It only needs to keep you busy, and for now, that is enough. The rhythm of a workday takes hold long before anyone would call it humane. You start with the body, because the body notices first. The body notices the wrong lift from 3 days ago. The body notices the chafed skin under the thumb where rope burned through callus. The body notices that last night's sleep never quite reached the places that ache most. Then comes the rest, damp wood underfoot, the smell of lime in the air, the rough cloth at the wrist, the hunger that does not disappear after bread, but only changes shape. Before the sun is fully up, you are already sweating under the cold. There is a way men move when they know a task too well. The shoulder turns before the hand reaches, the grip sets itself, the knees bend without discussion, on the scaffold, on the trench line, at the pulley rig, at the mortar bed. The work repeats until repetition becomes almost gentle in its own hard fashion. Lift, lower, brace, spread, tap, scrape, carry, return, lift again. Hours pass not because they are marked, but because motions begin to blur together. Your mind drifts where it can, toward the idea of dry socks, or a village lane, or whether the lump in your boot is a pebble, or simply your foot finally giving up and changing shape. It does not matter much. The hands continue, even when the mind wanders. When the sun rises higher, the sight changes character. Mist burns off, and the floors become visible. The trench looks more uneven than it did at dawn. The scaffold looks less trustworthy. Fresh mortar steams pale in the light, beautiful only from a distance. Flies arrive with the confidence of creatures who know you are too tired to fight them properly. Dust begins to cling to sweat at the neck and jaw. Men who said very little in the early cold begin swearing with greater inventiveness. Somewhere a hammer rings in an even pattern that almost becomes music until someone shouts and breaks it. There is no grandeur in any of this, and yet there is something almost peaceful in the certainty of what must happen next. The wall will not rise itself, the bucket will not climb itself, so you keep moving at midday, if such a thing can be called midday, rather than a brief rearrangement of suffering. Food appears. Stew if the day is generous, porridge if it is not, bread always, though bread varies in mood from merely stale to openly hostile. Men squat against stone, or sit on timber, or remain standing, because it takes less effort than lowering themselves, and then rising again. The talk, when there is any, comes in fragments, rumours of weather, gossip about someone's brother, complaints about a carpenter who measures twice and still cuts wrong, a story about another site where a tower leaned so far the Lord called it innovative before it killed 2 men. The stories are never entirely comforting, but they help the day pass from one half into the other. Then the work begins again, slower, perhaps in thought but not in demand. Light changes angle, shadows sharpen. You discover that fatigue does not arrive all at once but in layers. First the bright strength leaves your arms, then balance becomes slightly less certain on the scaffold. Then each trip across the yard feels longer than the last. Then the foreman's voice seems to come from a greater distance, even when he is close. By the final stretch of the day, the world narrows to whatever is directly in front of you. This stone, this seam, this rung, this bucket. The future castle, with all its towers and proud lines, reduces itself to the next task and asks only that you finish it before dark. And yet there is a strange mercy in repetition, because when the work is familiar, the mind no longer fights it so hard. You learn where to place your weight, you learn which men can be trusted on a rope, you learn which plank on the scaffold should never be stepped on quickly. You learn when the mason is about to reject a stone before he says a word. These are not noble knowledges, but they are useful, and usefulness has its own warmth. By evening, when the hammering dies down and the site exhales the day's noise, you can look back across the rough shape of the build and pick out some small evidence that time moved. A wall line slightly higher, a trench slightly cleaner, a load of stone reduced to placed blocks, not much perhaps. Never as much as the body feels it earned, but enough to let the work continue tomorrow. Only after that rhythm settles does the larger idea of the castle begin to come into focus. Until then, it is simply labour. After that, it becomes organised labour in service of something more than a pile of stone. A castle is not merely a large house, though lords sometimes behave as if comfort were the point. Nor is it purely a fortress, though every wall and opening remembers violence in advance. It is several things at once. It is a storehouse, a symbol, a statement, a safe place for grain, coin, records, weapons, families, alliances, ambitions, and fear. It is a way of saying to the countryside that power lives here and intends to keep living here. It is a tax chest with towers. It is a residence armoured into a message, the master mason, on a day when his temper is briefly less vicious, might explain some of this with a stick and a patch of dirt. Here, the outer wall, here the gate, here the great hall, here the chapel, because even a hard man likes heaven nearby when he can afford it. Here, the keep, thick and high enough to remain after lesser things fail. Here the service spaces, the kitchens, the storage rooms, the stables, the places that smell of smoke and beasts rather than piety. He might say barbican, bailey, curtain wall, garderobe, machicolation, as though naming a thing makes it easier to build. Magiculation, as though naming a thing makes it easier to build. Perhaps it does for him, for you. The words arrive slowly, attaching themselves not to drawings but to places you must carry loads through. What matters more quickly is the realization that nothing in the castle is accidental, even when it feels improvised. Thickness means defense, but also intimidation. Height means sightline, but also prestige. A window is cut one way because it should admit light, another because it should resist entry. A stair turns the way it does because at some future date a sword arm may need the advantage. A hall is placed where it can gather warmth, guests and authority in one controlled space. The castle is a body with deliberate bones, but like any body, it depends on what cannot be seen from a distance. And no matter how deliberate the design, the site itself keeps arguing back. The land slopes, the stream floods, clay holds water where gravel would have behaved better. Timber arrives warped, stone splits along the wrong line. Money pauses, a lord changes his mind because he saw a different tower shape while visiting a cousin. A season arrives early and hardens ground that was meant to be dug another month. So the idea of the castle on parchment, if there is parchment at all, and not only memory, habit and rough marks, is forever being bargained with by weather and earth and human stubbornness. The castle, as imagined, is clean. The castle as built is negotiated daily. You feel this most clearly where everything begins, in the ground. Before a wall becomes visible, men disappear up to their ankles and shins in the work of convincing earth to hold what is being asked of it. Trenches open along lines that make sense only from above. Mud is shoveled out, then more mud slides in, water seeps where no one wanted water. The question beneath every other question is always the same: will this hold? Not hold for a day, not hold until supper, but hold under years of wait. Storms, frost, settling, and the offended pride of rich men who expect permanence from a landscape that has offered no such promise. Foundation work has none of the pride people later attached to architecture. It is not visible in the way towers are visible. It does not catch the light elegantly. It is wet, repetitive, and uncertain. You dig through soil that changes character every few feet, from gravelly and kind to sticky and suspicious. Some patches drink water and release it, others cling to it like misers. Men argue over depth with the solemnity of priests. Deep enough not to sink, someone says, which is the kind of answer that comforts no one and yet proves oddly hard to improve upon. Crushed stone gets layered down, sand follows, sometimes timber pilings are driven where the ground feels treacherous. Sometimes a day is spent correcting a line that wandered by the width of a hand, because that small wandering might become a future, lean, no wall can survive. When at last the master mason paces the trench edge and decides the earth is good enough, the mood shifts. Not into celebration exactly, because men who build things for long periods do not trust celebration, but into a wary readiness. The first stones are coming. They sit nearby on sledges, huge, angular, more confidence than object. To move, one requires not drama, but obedience to weight. 6 men, 8 perhaps, poles through rings, shoulders under strain, feet testing every step. The stone does not care if you are strong. It only cares whether you stay coordinated long enough to keep it from crushing a foot, chipping a corner, or turning the whole effort into an hour of shouted blame. The first block takes forever to move a short distance. It enters the trench as if reluctantly. The apprentice with the chalk line hovers close enough to be annoying and useful at once. The mason kneels to inspect the bed. Mortar is spread. Adjustments are made that seem impossible given the size of the thing. Yet somehow a wedge here, a scrape there, a pressure on the rope, and the block settles into its place with the heavy finality of a decision. The mason taps it, listening. Everyone waits, then comes the small nod that means the future tower, however faintly, has truly begun. Once you have seen that happen, the whole site changes in your mind. Before, it was effort. Now it is sequence. The lower stones must be cut cleaner, heavier, more trustworthy. They bear not only themselves, but every ambition stacked above them. Higher up, other fillings can hide within the wall, rubble and smaller pieces tucked between better faces to save time and material. But here at the base, there is no room for pretending. Each block must justify itself. You begin to understand why a castle rises so slowly. It is not only because the stones are heavy, it is because every mistake made here is patient enough to wait years before revealing itself. Of course, the stones do not appear on sight by kindness. They come from the quarry, and the quarry is its own kingdom of discomfort. The walk there is long enough to tire you before the work begins. The place itself looks less like a workshop than a wound opened in the land. Dust hangs above it in pale drifts. Iron strikes echo from its faces. Men below look small against the walls of rock they are persuading into surrender. Here the future castle exists as resistance. It is still embedded in hillside and ledge, held inside layers that care nothing for lords or plans. Quarry work teaches you that stone is not one thing. Limestone yields more readily, but weathers differently. Sandstone may behave well until the wrong strike travels through a hidden weakness. Harder rock feels less like material than punishment. The experienced men read lines and veins with an intimacy that looks almost magical from a distance. They place the point of the chisel where the break should begin, then strike again and again until a crack answers. When it answers well, a block comes free with a sound that feels almost generous. When it answers badly, the stone shatters into disappointment and extra labor. Either way, it must be moved. The dust is the real ruler there. It fills the nose, the eyes, the mouth, the folds of clothing, the cracks in the skin. By noon your sweat has turned it into a pale grit that seems determined to become part of you. Older quarrymen carry a cough like a permanent companion. They do not speak of it with fear. They speak of it as if weather has settled inside them and will stay. Heat pools in the cut rock too, so that even on a day with wind elsewhere, the quarry holds warmth in a way that feels personal. One man faints, water is thrown. He is cursed back to consciousness, and after enough shade to stop looking dead, set to lighter work that is not especially light. Rough shaping happens there before the cart ride. Corners are knocked into line, faces are persuaded toward usefulness. You learn quickly how little romance survives first contact with a building block. Before it becomes clean ashlar in a tower wall, it is simply a bad-tempered piece of earth that has to be coaxed into agreeing with a measuring stick. When enough of them are ready, rollers go beneath, crowbars lift, curses multiply, and the cart receives its burden. Riding back on such a load is a lesson in how roads were designed mainly to humble the body. Every rut feels like a fresh argument between bone and wood. By the time the stone arrives at the site, you've already suffered enough for it to feel familiar. Then there is the lime. Stone gives the wall its visible body, but lime gives it its grip. The first time you are sent to the kiln crew, the word sounds harmless enough, almost pleasant if one has lived too long among hardships. Then you see the men working there, white-dusted, careful, half-wrapped in cloth, moving with the caution of people who know their material will burn skin without hatred and blind an eye without remorse. The kiln breathes heat all day and all night, fed by fuel and limestone, until the rock becomes something more dangerous than it was in the hillside. Quicklime is not dramatic in appearance. Its danger is quieter. Water touches it, and suddenly it hisses, steams, spits, comes alive in the worst possible mood. Slaking, it is the sort of task that teaches respect very quickly. You pour, stir, step back, cough, squint, and try not to breathe wrong. Dust catches in the throat and sits there like a complaint. Droplets on the wrist sting longer than they should. Older men wrap hands and faces with habitual care. One tells you, without much interest, that he once lost sight for days after a splash found his eye in a sudden rain. It returned, mostly. The way he says, mostly, is enough to keep you cautious. Yet, out of that harsh white fury comes mortar, plaster, wash, the soft unseen matter that lets a wall trust itself. There is something almost unfair about how invisible good mortar remains once a wall is finished. No one visits a castle later and praises the binding line with the same awe they grant the stone faces. Yet without that pale paste, the entire thing would be only a stack with ambitions. The masons debate whether fresh slaked mix is best, or whether aged mortar gains a better temper by sitting. Someone swears by additives whispered about with half belief. Blood, egg white, beer gone bad, this herb or that. Most of it sounds like the sort of certainty men grow when work is hard, and science is mostly memory with attitude. But the care is real. You watch them judge texture by eye, weight by feel, readiness by the drag of a trowel. It is craft, even if it looks from far away like men flinging wet chalk at stone. And once mortar and stone are ready, work climbs, scaffolding enters your life, not as technology, but as a test of what fear can become when repeated often enough. From below, it looks temporary, because it is. From above, it looks insulting, because it is that too. Standards, ledgers, braces, lashings, planks laid where planks can be laid, all of it rising around unfinished walls like a nervous thought. You climb with a bucket or tool or load in one hand and your better judgment hanging back on the ground. The higher you go, the more the body becomes aware of itself in singular pieces. Foot, hand, breath, eye. Wind comes harder up there. Boards answer weight with creaks that sound too conversational. At first, every height feels like a mistake. Then a different feeling takes over. Not comfort, never that, but attention. You stop imagining the fall in grand terms and begin thinking in practical ones. Is this plank damp? Is that rope newly tied or old? Where will the bucket swing if the man below misreads the signal? Where should your shoulder be if the block shifts? Care becomes rhythm, one foot, then the next, hand to beam, bucket to platform. Step aside, lower, brace, the sight beneath you shrinks into pattern. Men become moving points, carts draw lines through mud. Trenches reveal geometry, impossible to appreciate from the ground. Einstein, for a moment. Occasionally, the whole plan opens beneath you, and you understand why anyone ever wanted to build like this. Then the scaffold shivers, the wind changes, and philosophy ends. Rain makes an enemy of everything. Mortar dislikes it. Trenches fill with it. Boards betray under it. Timber swells with it. Carts bog down in it. A day of hard rain turns the site into a rehearsal for a moat. Except no one is laughing, and the future defenders are currently up to their ankles in brown water, trying to save yesterday's work. You learn what a wall face looks like when wet mortar begins to slump. You learn how much of a trench can collapse inward while still technically existing. You learn that mules have opinions about mud and express them with open contempt. Men who can carry stone all day become strangely delicate when negotiating a slick plank 30 feet up, and rightly so. On those days, the labor changes from building to rescuing. Channels must be dug fast enough to pull water away from fresh foundations. Sand heaps turn to paste. Lime tubs must be covered or shifted. Tools vanish under muck as if swallowed by the earth on purpose. The foreman's temper dissolves and reforms into a more chaotic state. No one is dry, no one is graceful, yet there is, buried inside all that discomfort, a kind of fellowship reigning forces. Misery shared evenly becomes almost companionable. A look exchanged over a flooded ditch says more than a speech. A joke about castle swimming earns more gratitude than wit deserves. When the weather finally eases and the clouds lift enough for light to return, the sight looks ruined from one angle and merely challenged from another. Men choose the second angle because work requires it. After such draining stretches, the day always seeks a quieter pocket. Evening in camp is not peace exactly, but it is something adjacent. Fires are coaxed from damp wood, stew is stretched beyond optimism, cloaks steam, backs curve toward warmth, the noise drops from command and impact to murmur and spoon scrape. This is where the work becomes human again, rather than only physical. Bread is traded. Someone complains about his boots with such commitment that for a minute boots become the whole world. Someone else mentions a distant village as though it were a myth. Gossip travels with more ease than carts do. There are stories of plague somewhere, of a lord's hunting trip, of another site where a chapel arch was built wrong and no one noticed for months because everyone was too cold to look up. Food has a way of revealing hierarchy with brutal honesty. The best fed men on site are rarely the ones carrying the heaviest loads. Skilled masons may see coin and decent portions. Carpenters and smiths fare better than common haulers. Labourers like you survive on whatever the day has not denied. Crusts, root vegetables, thin broth, ale if fortune or carelessness allows. Sometimes meals are brought to the crews and eaten where men are working. Sometimes you are the one carrying the kettle, climbing where others cannot spare the time to descend. Hunger sharpens all social edges. It is why theft feels so dangerous in camp, not because property is sacred, but because trust is scarce. If a man steals bread, he steals more than food. He steals the assumption that the person beside you will not turn desperate at your expense. You see it one day when a younger worker is caught with another man's pouch. He is not evil, only frightened and hungry in the way many are frightened and hungry. That does not help him. Mercy is a luxury sites like this distrust, because they fear what happens if every need becomes an argument. The foreman dismisses him quickly. Out beyond camp, dismissal can mean disappearance more often than reform. The men return to work afterward with the particular heaviness that follows any reminder of how thin the line is between belonging and being cast out. By evening, the fire crackles as always, but the voices around it stay lower. It does not take much to unsteady a camp. It takes even less to remind everyone how close to the edge they were already living. And yet skill, when it appears, changes the shape of fatigue. There comes a time when someone finally presses tools into your hands, not just to carry, but to use. A hammer, a point chisel, a measuring stick, bent enough to be honest about the imperfection of all measurement. Suddenly, the work contains not only force, but judgment. You stand near a mason and watch him read a block the way another man might read weather. He taps, listens, studies the grain, shifts the angle of attack, and strikes. Stone flakes away cleanly, not because he is stronger than you, but because he has learned where not to resist. When you try, your first effort goes poorly, the chisel skids, the face chips wrong, and the block develops a flaw it had not asked for. The mason corrects it with insulting ease. He tells you not to force it. The stone already knows what shape it wants. Your job is to persuade that line stays with you longer than it should, perhaps because so little else on site sounds like wisdom. With tools, the work narrows from general exhaustion to specific attention. Chisels need sharpening, mallets crack, a measuring cord stretched too long. In damp weather can betray an entire line of work by inches that become feet, that become disaster. Tools also carry the private superstitions of men who depend on them. One worker ties a charm to his hammer grip, another refuses to lend a favourite chisel, claiming it turns dull in unworthy hands. Someone has carved a tiny symbol near the neck of his mallet. Ownership matters here because control matters, and in a place where so much can go wrong without asking permission, a personal tool feels almost like a promise. With practice, even a labourer begins to feel the difference between carrying stone and shaping it. The same site that once seemed made entirely of shouting and weight opens into subtler patterns. The clean edge of a fit block, the smooth line of a seam done well, the satisfaction of setting something not only in place but correctly in place. It does not make the body less tired, but it gives tiredness a finer texture. On some evenings, you find yourself carrying a half-shaped piece back toward the fire, just to work at it a little more in fading light. Not because anyone commanded it, but because the act of making something fit is one of the few things that quiets the mind without emptying it. Then the ground betrays the wall, not all at once at first, a dampness where there should not be dampness, a slight bulge, a trench holding more water than last week. Men mutter about clay and slope and the stream running too close. New channels are marked and dug to carry off what should never have pooled. Broken pottery, old boards, rubble, anything serviceable is pressed into drainage because serviceability matters more than elegance in the unseen places. The master mason and foreman argue in tones they think the labourers cannot hear, though anger carries very well across wet ground. You find yourself once again shoveling not toward progress, but toward prevention, trying to convince water to leave a place it has every reason to prefer. It is astonishing how much of castle building is really water management, performed by people who would rather be remembered for towers. Gravel is hauled, soak pits are tried, trench walls collapse inward with a kind of exhausted malice. Rain returns just often enough to mock improvement. Every discussion circles back to the same point from a different angle. If the base is wrong, all elegance above it is merely delayed collapse. You begin to understand why some walls take so long to rise. Not because men are idle, but because the ground must be persuaded repeatedly before it stops arguing. When the wall finally falls, it makes less noise in memory than you would expect. At the time, it is all sound and dust and movement too large to understand. Later, what remains is the sense of a certainty suddenly withdrawing. One moment, the curtain wall stands as it stood yesterday, damp but whole. The next, there is a crack that does not belong to ordinary labour. Then another. Then the section gives way in a heavy outward failure, stone rupturing into air and crashing down in a confusion of blocks. Powder, splintered scaffold, shouted warnings too late to help. You dive more by instinct than thought. Dust enters everywhere. For a moment, the world contains only impact and the stubborn refusal of sound to settle. When it does settle, injury appears in pieces, a twisted leg, blood on a block face, a worker half buried and not speaking, men running, then freezing, then running again. The master mason's face empties itself and fills with fury. Causes are named before, causes are known. Bad stone, thin mortar. Water behind the base. Poor drainage, poor judgment. The truth, as usual, is likely shared by more than one mistake. You are handed salvage work because everything after collapse turns immediately practical. Which stones can be reused, which timber is sound, which debris must be moved before evening. Grief exists, but it does so while carrying. There is something terrible about how quickly a disaster becomes labor. Fallen blocks are stacked, nails are collected, cracked pieces are sorted from sound ones. The injured are carried away from the line of sight, partly from care, partly because no sight wants death lingering where work is meant to resume. By afternoon, a new plan is already being muttered into existence. Deeper here, better drain there, hand-check every block, rebuild slower, build stronger, promise against repetition. You almost believe it, because everyone needs to believe something. But what stays with you most is not the revised plan. It is the fact that a wall which looked solid from 10 paces had been, all along, only conditionally solid. That knowledge does not leave. It enters your body and makes you place your feet more carefully afterward. Perhaps that is why the castle's defensive features begin to feel stranger the more you work on them. Up to this point, the project has been about resisting collapse and weather and hunger and impatience. Then suddenly, you are helping shape openings designed not merely to protect, but to harm. Narrow slits angled for archers, holes above gateways through which heavy or boiling things may one day be dropped on men below. Overhanging supports intended to carry wooden structures from which defenders can rain down misery in a controlled manner. The castle reveals itself as a patient instrument, beauty in one direction, injury in another. There is craft even in that cruelty. A staircase turns the way it does, because someone someday will fight upon it. The narrowness of a passage is not inconvenience but strategy. The placement of a door, the reach of a parapet, the depth of a crenelle, the angle of a murder hole, all are decisions made by men who understand that stone can shape violence long before violence arrives. It unsettles you, though not enough to stop your hands. The work remains the work. A carefully seated support block is still satisfying, even if its eventual purpose is to help strangers injure strangers more efficiently. That may be one of the strangest truths of the site. Craft does not always care what it serves. And the castle, while preparing itself for war, also prepares itself for filth. No song lingers on the nobility of waste management, yet someone must build the chutes, the pits, the drainage, the little stone decisions that keep a noble's comfort from becoming everyone's immediate nightmare. Guardrobes, they call them, with a refinement the reality does not deserve. You kneel around openings in upper rooms and seal seams thickly, because gravity, while useful, is not neat. Lower down, pits are lined, floors are sloped, airflow considered. There is actual thought given to where smells will travel, and where they must absolutely not. It turns out that power has many practical needs, some of them deeply undignified. Once you have helped line one such chute, you cannot again look at the outer wall of a castle without imagining what moves invisibly through its smaller openings. It becomes harder to romanticize towers when you know what passes behind them. Yet this knowledge does not ruin the castle, it humanizes it. A stronghold is still a place where people eat, sleep, pray, cook, freeze, quarrel, and relieve themselves. It is a machine, yes, but one built around bodies that remain bodies even when dressed in velvet. That becomes clearest when interior spaces begin to take shape. The kitchen, for example, is less room than engine. Hearths broad enough for serious fire, ovens set into thick walls, channels in the floor to guide away grease and wash water. Stone basins hollowed smooth enough to hold water briefly and release it properly. Smoke hoods that promise order and then backdraft in testing, filling the space with an instant reminder that fire has opinions too. You work among cooks moving in too soon, among geese, sacks, wood, shouted needs, and all the lively impatience that comes whenever a room meant for use begins demanding use before it is ready. A kitchen is not graceful, but it is alive quickly. The chapel feels different from the first step inside. Perhaps it is the relative quiet, perhaps the shape of light through unfinished windows, perhaps only the shared superstition of men who curse all day elsewhere and lower their voices here without admitting why. Even before the altar is complete, even before glass or cloth properly softens the openings, the room asks for a slower pace. You help guide a lintel into place above the entrance. Later, you smooth the base where sacred things will someday stand. A carved cross goes into stone under your careful hand. None of it makes you holy, but the work changes in your grip. Perfection is demanded here for reasons both spiritual and political. A chapel inside a castle is not only for prayer, it is also proof, displayed in stone, that the Lord wishes his power to look sanctioned from above. Then there are the stairs, the true spine of the tower. From outside they are invisible. Inside they coil upward, each tread a wedge, each wedge a lesson in how much geometry a mason can ask of a labourer before compassion should perhaps intervene. Every step must sit just so, neither proud nor shy, neither tilted enough to trip, nor shallow enough to weaken the turn. As they rise, the staircase begins to feel less like structure and more like intention made stone. It narrows perception, it guides the body, it controls how men will move years before those men arrive. You carry mortar and blocks into that turning space and realize, somewhere around the 10th repetition, that the castle is learning how to shape behavior long before it is inhabited. The roof, when it comes, transforms everything. Until then, the castle is bones and weather. Afterward, even half finished, it becomes a place. Roofing work is another punishment entirely. Huge timbers, slick heights, rain where you least want rain. Ropes that groan under strain, carpenters shouting measurements into wind, tree nails hammered into damp oak until frame becomes frame, rather than simply a pile of promising wood. You haul beams heavy enough to alter a man's thoughts. You brace, push, lift, and watch an upside-down forest slowly organize itself above the future hall. At any moment, it feels as though one mistake could undo half a season's effort. Yet one by one, the pieces lock. The first time you stand beneath a newly framed section and look up at structure where sky used to be, the whole project changes scale inside you. The hall sounds different. The air moves differently. The room, still wet in places and unfinished everywhere, suddenly has a sense of inwardness. Shelter is not complete, but it has begun. Some of the older workers say that once a roof goes on, a castle starts remembering. Before that, it is only exposed bone. After that, it becomes something capable of holding life. You are not sure you believe such things literally, but as rain taps on newly set members above, and the room beneath it grows quieter than it used to be, the thought does not seem foolish. By then, of course, the people with the least practical knowledge and the greatest power over the site begin to appear more often. Lords, stewards, inspectors sent in better boots than anyone laying stone. Their visits produce a special kind of panic, because nothing delays labour like the need to make labour look tidy for a man who wants proof of progress more than progress itself. Paths are raked, cracks are hidden behind cloth and optimism, benches are arranged in half-finished halls to imply use. Candles appear where smoke still drafts badly. Everyone performs improvement. The Lord arrives and walks the place with the easy dissatisfaction of someone who has never carried timber uphill in rain. He likes the chapel well enough. He finds the kitchen plain. He studies the gatehouse and wonders aloud if the proportions ought to be reconsidered. Reconsidered, the word moves through camp afterward, like a sickness. Men who spent months fighting stone now imagine all that effort unmade by a preference. Inspectors tap walls and write notes. They frown at features whose purpose they only partly grasp. A spiral stair is called narrow by a man who would no doubt later praise its defensibility in front of guests. A section of wall is judged not by whether it stands, but by whether it pleases. The master mason bows with a face so still it becomes frightening. Everyone else learns again that castles are not only defense or residence or history. They are ego with foundations. That knowledge stings most when set beside the cost already paid. A worker falls. It happens on a day that had otherwise pretended to be ordinary. Absent. Knee pull. Crack in a plank, a slip, a failed lashing, a misjudged step. Afterward, the cause never feels large enough to explain the ending. The body lands, and for a moment, the entire site stops around the fact of it. Then the site resumes. It has to. Canvas is found. Men are told to carry. Blood is scrubbed. A patch in the wall is finished before dusk. By nightfall, the place already looks as though the accident happened slightly farther away than it did. That is what work does to memory, when the work cannot stop. The dead man had hands like everyone else there, cracked, marked, ordinary. He may have had some small hope outside the site. Many do, though they speak of it less as years pass. Save enough coin, return home, rent a better strip of land, marry, repair a roof, raise animals, learn a trade worth more than your back. The castle does not care about any of this, not out of cruelty, but out of scale. It keeps taking what is offered to it and turning it into wall, stair, parapet, hall. There will be no plaque for the men lost to scaffold and stone. There will be only a finished thing later, and silence where their names should be. Maybe that is why the hardest truth arrives, not in disaster, but in duration. Time on a project like this stretches until it stops feeling like a project and starts feeling like climate. The tower that once stood only knee-high now casts a long shadow. The wall line that began as chalk and trench now exists in sections strong enough to lean against. Yet so much remains: the gatehouse unfinished, the chapel not yet dressed, the hall still echoing, the outer works only partly imagined in stone. New boys arrive with soft hands, while older men limp more openly than before. You begin to realize that the castle may not be completed within your own life. Not because anyone has failed exactly, but because this is how such things are. They extend beyond intention. They outlast the bodies currently feeding them. That realization is both wounding and oddly restful. You are not building a castle in the clean sense people later use. You are building part of one. You are one span in a bridge of labor stretched across generations. Another man laid blocks you never saw go down. Another will finish alignments you began. Someone yet unborn may patch cracks in what you carefully seek tomorrow. A castle is a conversation among workers who do not meet. Once you feel that ambition changes, it grows smaller and larger at once. Smaller, because you understand your place in the whole. Larger, because the whole no longer depends on your illusion that it ends with you. Winter makes this easy to believe. The first true snowfall changes the site into something suspended between construction and dream. Sound softens, ropes freeze stiff, planks whiten, stone takes on a hush that bare autumn walls never had. Men move more slowly, because cold insists on respect. Fires become necessary in ways summer men forget. Broth, even thin broth, feels like mercy, Work does not stop, but it alters. Covers are built over lime. Timbers are shielded as best they can be. The upper walls disappear and return as weather shifts. The half-finished castle looks less like a site and more like a ghost of its own future. There is beauty in it, which almost feels offensive after so much discomfort. Snow along parapets, frost catching on rough stone, the chapel window opening pale with light, the tower emerging out of morning haze like something the hill itself has decided to remember. Men notice it, and then pretend not to admire the place too openly, while it is still demanding so much would feel like surrender. Yet in winter, you cannot help seeing that even unfinished things can gather dignity simply by enduring. Around the fire, wrapped in every cloth that remains dry enough to matter, the old question returns. Will it ever be finished? One man says, yes, because lords never tire of walls. Another says no, because money tires before pride does. A third suggests the castle is cursed to remain half-made, which earns a brief laugh because laughter is cheaper than certainty. You do not answer. Somewhere under snow near the outer wall is a mark you scratched into stone last season, just to say you had stood there. That feels answer enough. Perhaps finishing is not the only form of permanence. And so, by the time the snow is deep enough to quiet even the most needless talk, the castle has become two things at once in your mind. It is still an appetite for labour, still a place that takes strength. Skin, time, teeth, breath, and sometimes names. But it is also no longer only that it is now a shape you know from within. You know how the kitchen floor drains, you know how the stair tightens as it climbs, you know where the scaffold once failed and where the wall had to be started again. You know which beam in the hall fought hardest before settling. You know the smell of the lime pit and the chapel's strange cool hush. You know where the future lord will sit and where his waist will fall. The castle, when seen from a distance later, will look singular. To you, it will always remain made of many hidden truths. Perhaps that is what the finished place remembers, if places remember anything at all. Not names, likely stone is poor at names, but pressure. Touch, repeated handling, careful setting, the weight of bodies leaning, lifting, carrying, correcting. Perhaps those remain in some quieter form. The future visitor will see only wall. You will always see the men straining at ropes below it. They will admire the tower's spiral and never think of the wrists that guided each tread into place. They will call the chapel serene and not imagine dust in the lungs of the man who carved the arch. They will speak of the gate's strength and not know how many times the proportions changed because one important man preferred a different impression. That does not make the later admiration false, it only makes it incomplete, and incompleteness, after all, has been the castle's truest condition from the start. Even once done, it will not be done. Mortar will crack, water will probe, timber will shift, repairs will come, additions will be argued over. One generation's finish becomes another generation's beginning. The wall that stood today may fail in 30 winters if drainage is neglected. The roof that feels triumphant now may burn. The hall may be extended. The chapel may receive glass. The outer works may be modernized by men who scoff at the choices you are still sweating over. Nothing here closes neatly, so the end of this journey cannot arrive like a lid placed firmly on a box. It must remain slightly open, the way a camp flap moves in winter wind, the way a half-finished tower holds sky where there should later be roof, the way a long project teaches you to live without perfect closure. Tonight, you lie back beneath coarse cloth again, snow ticks softly against canvas. Somewhere outside, a rope has frozen into a curved shape it did not choose. The fire near the center of camp is low now, Men cough in their sleep. Someone turns and mutters. Beyond the shelters, the castle waits in white silence, unfinished and patient, with walls that already look old in moonlight, though many are still young in labour. You are tired in the thorough way only repetition can make a person tired. Yet your mind moves once more across the site, not urgently now, only gently. The quarry road under pale dawn, the first block settling into the trench, lime steaming in cold air, a bucket swinging from scaffold rope, rainwater finding the low place, a hand on a half-shaped stone by firelight, the kitchen hearth smoking badly, the chapel arch warming in evening sun, snow on parapet teeth, none of it closes, it only drifts, one image to the next, as if the castle is still being assembled inside you from smaller pieces. And tomorrow, or some tomorrow very much like it, the men will rise again. A boot will strike wood, bread will be found, cloth will be wrapped. A foreman will shout, someone will carry, someone will cut, someone will climb, someone will curse the weather, someone will adjust a line no one else noticed was wrong. The wall will gain a little height or lose some to water and gain it back later. The hall will darken under new cover, the chapel will take another detail, the Lord may change his mind, the season may turn, a young labourer may arrive and look up at the tower with the same disbelief you once felt. The castle will continue becoming itself by refusing to hurry. For now, though, you do not need the whole future, you only need this last quiet. The bed of straw beneath you, the cold pressing lightly at the edges, the knowledge that beyond the canvas, beyond the camp, beyond the pale line of winter fields, the half-born fortress stands where men have asked it to stand. Not finished, not perfect, not merciful, but real enough to cast a shadow. Hold a room, resist a storm, remember a touch in silence. And that is where you leave it tonight, not complete, but still rising. There are mornings when the first true sensation is not pain, but weight. Not the weight of stone yet, not the weight of a beam, but the weight of being expected. It sits on your chest before you rise. It follows you into your boots. It walks beside you across the yard while the sky is still undecided between darkness and dull light. On those mornings, the camp feels less like a temporary shelter and more like a long corridor between one day of labour and the next. Men emerge from tents and huts with the same careful stiffness. Someone coughs, someone spits, someone laughs once at nothing, because if he does not produce some sound of his own, the site will claim the first word and keep all the others too. The labour changes you in small increments that are hard to notice until they have accumulated. Your hands thicken, your feet learn the shape of uneven ground so well they stop arguing with it. You begin to tell different kinds of silence apart. The silence before a heavy lift, the silence after a shouted mistake, the silence around a man who has been injured but not yet moved, the silence of a room not yet roofed, the silence inside the chapel different from all the rest. A castle site teaches you to hear absences as much as sounds. It also teaches you how quickly one can begin to measure life by tools. A good chisel day, a broken rope day, a wet mortar day, a day when the wheel on the cart holds together, and therefore half the world seems briefly reasonable. Sometimes you are moved from one crew to another without warning, and the shift itself becomes the day's event. 1 week at the quarry, another on scaffold, another on drainage, another carrying lime tubs until your sleeves crust white at the elbows. This rotation is partly necessity and partly management. A body worked the same way too long begins to fail in visible fashion. Better, from the foreman's point of view, to spread the damage around. Yet for the labourer, the change offers an odd kind of education. The castle slowly introduces itself piece by piece. One day through mud and foundation line, another through smoke and kiln heat, another through the geometry of a stair, another through the sour hidden corners where waste must go. By the time years have passed, you know the place more intimately than any visitor ever will, though that knowledge is scattered through the body rather than stored in words. Payday for the skilled men arrives with more ceremony than it ought to. Tallies are checked, marks are counted, coin changes hands with the dignified clink of a system pretending to be fair. The labourers who work under obligation, rent or custom stand aside and watch. It would be easier to resent the masons if they looked rich, but most of them only look less desperate. They have better boots, perhaps better knives. The don't right to complain in a different tone. They too are at the mercy of delays, weather, bad orders, and noble vanity. Yet there is no denying the order of things. A clean-cut stone is valued above a carrying back, a measured line above a pair of shoulders. The wall is built from all of it, but not all of it is honoured evenly. You learn not to let that thought grow too sharp. Sharp thoughts are hard to carry for long while doing work that requires both hands. Better to let resentment dull into observation. The carpenter eats indoors on some days. The smith receives thanks when a hinge works as intended. The master mason, despite all the shouting, is spoken to with a respect no one offers the trench crew. Meanwhile, the men at the very bottom become almost interchangeable in the eyes of administration. If one disappears, another appears from some village or obligation to take his place. Yet in the life of the site, they are not interchangeable at all. One man can be trusted to brace the load before it slips. Another can smell weak mortar before the trowel confirms it. Another keeps spirits up with wit, bad enough to be useful. Another never speaks, but never lets go of the rope too early. Hierarchies flatten badly at the level of survival. There are also the small economies inside the camp, quiet exchanges the overseers barely notice. A crust traded for a repair to a torn glove, a better spoon borrowed in return for sharing a drier corner of shelter, a wedge of onion from a cousin in the village exchanged for help sharpening a blade. These are not luxuries, they are the soft web that keeps labour from becoming pure machinery. When that web tears, everything feels harsher. A stolen pouch, a hidden ration, a missing tool, such things move through camp faster than any official order. Not because the value of the object is always great, but because trust in a place like this is both scarce and necessary. One cannot haul a block safely with a man one believes may look after himself first. After a hard section of the day, the return to camp has its own ritual. Tools counted back into the chest, if the chest still has a functioning latch. Hands rinsed if there is water to spare, mud knocked from boots with a stick, cloaks spread where smoke might dry them, without filling them entirely with sparks. Then the waiting around the pot, which is less orderly than any noble household would tolerate, and more civil than any noble would imagine. Men complain with real artistry, while food is ladled. The common stew never tastes the same twice, not because of culinary imagination, but because ingredients vary according to weather, luck, theft, and whatever can be purchased without offending the ledger. Sometimes it is root and barley with ambition. Sometimes there is a thread of meat through it thin enough to inspire philosophical debate about whether it was ever truly present. Sometimes the warmth alone is enough to make it feel abundant. In those moments, the castle loosens its grip on the mind for a while. Someone remembers a river at home. Someone imitates the Lord's voice badly and earns a dangerous laugh. Someone swears that in another county he saw a lord tear down a newly built hall simply because his brother's hall was broader. Such stories always sound unbelievable until you have watched a noble disapprove of a perfectly serviceable wall. Then they sound not only plausible, but almost modest. A few men sing, "If ale has appeared," the songs are rarely beautiful. Beauty is not the point. The point is rhythm and breath, and the relief of doing something with the mouth that is not chewing or cursing. Even bad singing can make a camp feel less temporary for a little while. Then dawn returns, as if it had not heard a single complaint. The first time you are sent to help with the tower stair in earnest, the mason overseeing it treats the whole thing with the solemn irritation of a man forced to explain the obvious to people he assumes are not built for obviousness. Yet even he softens slightly when the first finished treads begin to stack into a visible turn. There is something compelling about watching a stair rise inside a round space. It transforms emptiness into root. It gives the tower an interior logic. From below, the central core looks almost serene. From the side, each stone reveals how much fussy labour serenity requires. A tread too broad changes the turn. Too narrow, and men will curse it forever. Too steep, and armour will hate it. Too shallow, and the line fails. The stair is one long argument between purpose and comfort, and purpose wins every time. As the steps climb, the spiral begins to do something to the mind. You cannot see very far ahead in it. Light enters unevenly. Sound twists. A man above you can seem closer or farther away than he is. The mason says this is part of the design, though it is difficult to tell whether he means it as strategy or simply as a justification for inconvenience. Either way, the effect is real. A tower stair does not invite haste. It makes each ascent intimate and slightly suspicious. You place each foot where someone else determined it should go. Years later, a guard, a messenger, a frightened servant, a lord in anger, all will be directed by choices being made now, while mortar dries beneath your fingers. That knowledge slows you in a way no command can. The interior rooms bring their own revelations. In the great hall, proportion matters in a different way than on a wall walk. A hall must be impressive, yes, but it must also gather warmth, receive sound, permit movement, seat hierarchy, and endure the smoke of repeated feasts. You help set broad hearthstones, and realize that the difference between grandeur and discomfort may sometimes be no more than how high a vent is cut, or how generously a beam spans. The work there feels at once more civilized and more absurd. Men who have spent weeks in mud now worry over alignments that will someday determine whether a noble feels properly magnified while dining. It is hard not to smile at the thought. Harder still when the carpenter reminds you that a hall built wrongly shames its owner in ways a ditch never can. The kitchens are busier than any place has a right to be before they are even done. Storage niches are argued over as though war depends on where the salt goes. Hooks for spits, shelves for trenchers, basins for washing, channels for runoff. All of it must be fitted before the first true meal can happen with any dignity. Meanwhile, cooks and helpers press in early, unwilling to wait until perfection. Flour dust meets stone dust, steam meets chill air. A half-tested oven smokes back into the room and sends everyone crawling toward the door in a coughing line that would be hilarious if lungs were less important. Even disorder there feels domestic compared to the outer wall. The castle, in its own clumsy way, is learning daily life. The chapel, by contrast, seems to learn reverence faster than use. Light enters through openings, not yet glazed, and still somehow behaves as though it knows where to settle. You carry shaped stone into that room and become careful in a different register. Outside, Speed matters, inside. Finish matters, the edges must soften. The line of an arch must persuade the eye upward without asking how much shoulder strain went into achieving that persuasion. A tiny recess where a sacred object may later rest receives more care than an entire stretch of drainage ditch. It would be easy to mock that if human beings were simpler than they are. But after enough nights in camp, you begin to understand the hunger for a place where the roughness of the world has been temporarily argued into order. Even the labourers walk more slowly there, not always from piety, sometimes simply from relief. There are days when the castle seems determined to show you every possible version of itself. In the morning, you help carry lime. By midday, you are patching a slit window on the outer wall. By afternoon, you are told to assist with a latrine chute because the wind pattern has been reconsidered and no one wants the future Lord's private chamber perfumed by its own practicalities. The absurdity becomes familiar. 1 hour you are contributing to sanctity, the next to sewage, then to defence, then to display. It is only later, lying down with smoke in your hair and dust in your teeth, that you realise this is exactly what a castle is. Sanctity, sewage, defence, display, all bound into the same stone body. A Lord's visit can undo a week's worth of emotional balance in an afternoon. It begins with tidying, which is a suspicious activity on any labour site, because it implies someone important will soon confuse neatness with progress. Rubble is shifted out of sight. Fresh straw covers a patch of mud. No one had time to pave. Good tools are laid where they can be noticed. A torn banner is replaced with one only slightly less torn. Men with the least presentable tunics are moved from the most visible paths if possible, though there are limits to how much labour can be hidden at a castle under construction. When the riders arrive, hooves bright with dampened cloaks finer than anything in camp, the entire site stiffens. Everyone becomes aware, at once, of every unfinished seam. The Lord dismounts, as though the ground has been waiting all day for his feet. He surveys the walls with the expression of a man studying a purchase he half regrets and half intends to enlarge. He asks questions that sound casual and alter months of work. Could the tower sit higher? Might the gate read as stronger if its opening were narrowed? Would the hall benefit from more light? Has anyone considered a more fashionable curve to this parapet? The answers offered are careful, humble, strangled by diplomacy. The master mason knows that a single elegant objection from a bored noble can become a season of corrective labour. So he bows, he explains, he promises, the rest of you look at stone you set by hand and imagine it ordered apart, because someone with soft palms found it insufficiently imposing. When the retinue leaves, camp grows quiet in a resentful way. Nobody needs to summarize what happened. The comments repeat themselves well enough inside the mind. The younger workers rage more openly because they have not yet learned how durable noble inconsistency can be. The older ones merely look tired in advance. One says he once built the same gate 3 times for a lord who wanted to feel decisive by changing nothing and calling it refinement. Everyone believes him immediately. That is perhaps the sharpest education the site offers. Castles are not built only against enemies. They are built through layers of vanity, doubt, fashion, inheritance and public theatre. The wall does not rise because it is needed alone. It rises because it must signify. Injuries teach their own doctrine. A crushed hand changes the speed of a crew for weeks. A twisted knee alters how loads are shared. A lime burn on the forearm turns every lift into a lesson in avoiding cloth against the skin. There is no clean place to put pain here. Men work around it if they can, through it if they must, beneath it if there is no alternative. Some disappear from the site and are not discussed much afterward, not because nobody cares, but because naming every loss would make the camp unbearable. One learns to recognize absence by the gap in a routine rather than by official word. The joke that used to come from that side of the fire does not come. The man who always checked a knot before anyone else is not on the scaffold this morning. The coffer's gone. The bowl remains unused. The castle accepts such subtractions without visibly changing shape, which may be why they hurt. Yet the labour also produces a quiet form of pride, not easily admitted aloud. When our corbella sits true beneath an overhang, when a wall line runs straighter than expected over difficult ground, when a roof beam finally settles after resisting for half a day, when a stair can be climbed smoothly for the first time without tools and mortar interrupting every turn. These moments are small but real. They do not excuse the hardship, they simply exist beside it. A man can despise the conditions and still feel a surge of satisfaction when something fits exactly as it should. Perhaps that is another of the castle's hidden truths. It feeds on bodies, yes, but it also gives some of those bodies a vocabulary of making they did not have before. Even a labourer eventually looks at a wall and sees not only stone but decision. As months become seasons and seasons years, your relationship with the site changes further. At the beginning, you walked into it. Now it feels as though you move within it, the way one moves within weather or memory. You know where mud collects after the first hard rain. You know which side of the hall catches morning chill longest. You know the smell of the upper scaffold in dry wind compared with wet wind. You know which corners of the camp remain driest in prolonged bad weather and who reaches them first. You know the quarry road's worst ruts by feel. You know that certain beams in the kitchen crack as they cool after a big fire. You know the chapel's echo is shortest when the room is coldest. This is a form of belonging, although not one anyone would envy without understanding it. On especially tired evenings, you imagine future life inside the castle, not as grandeur, but as ordinary movement. A servant carrying rushes into the hall, a child running the stair too fast, a cook rinsing turnips in the basin you helped set, a priest speaking softly in the chapel where you once inhaled dust while smoothing an arch, guards complaining on the wall, walkabout wind, a noblewoman shutting a shutter against weather. These images steady the mind more than battle ever could. They remind you that stone is not only meant to frighten, it is also meant to hold repeated human habits until they become tradition. Strange thing is that by the time those habits arrive, most people living them will never think about the labour that prepared their path. Perhaps that is normal. Floors rarely thank foundations either. Then winter deepens again, and all thought contracts toward warmth. Ice forms in the bucket rims, the camp ropes stiffen, the outer world narrows to breath and work and fire and bed. Yet even then the castle remains active, not in full stride, but in stubborn motion. Covers are adjusted, cracks are watched, loads are reduced, but not abandoned. A hall partly roofed can now shelter some tasks from the worst weather, which makes everyone understand the value of enclosure more intimately than any lord's speech. Men gather inside unfinished rooms simply because the air moves less cruelly there. A castle under construction begins, in those moments, to protect the people still making it. It does so awkwardly, incompletely, but enough to be noticed. That may be the gentlest reward the whole project offers. At night, under snow-heavy dark, the site seems both farther away and more present than it does by day. You can almost map it with closed eyes. Here the trench that kept flooding, there the wall that failed, beyond it the tower stair, coiling upward in dry stone. Off to one side the kitchen, alive now in brief bursts of true heat. On another edge the chapel, still incomplete but already commanding silence. The roof frame over the hall, creaking in cold, like a ship moored on land. The latrine chutes you wish you had not had to know so well. The gatehouse whose proportions may change again if fashion demands. The whole place rests, but never fully sleeps. Timber settles. Snow slides. Water finds cracks and tests them. The castle keeps negotiating with the world, even in darkness. What remains, at the edge of sleep, is not a conclusion, but a companionship. You and the unfinished fortress have worn each other into familiarity. It has taken strength from you. You have taken understanding from it. Neither exchange has been gentle, yet now, when you imagine the place complete, you no longer imagine only the finished silhouette against the sky. You imagine the hands beneath it, the repeated returns to safety after each hard stretch, the quiet by the fire, the bowl of thin broth held close in both hands, the joke shared on the scaffold to keep fear from becoming too articulate, the sound of snow on canvas while the walls stand waiting. The castle may someday look finished to other eyes. To yours it will always be full of intervals, pauses, breaths and bodies, moving through weather toward the next stone. So, if the future insists on admiring it, let the admiration stand. But let there also be this softer truth folded inside it, that the towers were raised by people who needed rest more than glory, that the hall was framed by men thinking not of feasts but of surviving the season, that the chapel was carved by hands that had also dug drains, that the proud gate was argued over by those who never had the luxury of treating architecture as an opinion alone, that the castle, for all its power, was born in repetition and sustained by countless returns to ordinary endurance. And because of that, it remains human, even at its most imposing. The fire sinks lower. Someone nearby shifts in sleep and pulls a blanket closer. Outside, wind draws a light line of snow along the ground-facing side of the camp. The unfinished walls beyond it do not ask for anything more tonight. They simply remain cold, silent, patient, still rising in ways you cannot see while lying here. That is enough, more than enough. The rest can wait for morning.